Hello fanatics, welcome to True Crime Storytime. With me, Cindy. I will be working on one of my cuties that I have kind of nicknamed on my channel. I've named them cuties for some reason. They're cute, but yeah, I'll be working on that while talking about the Chris Benoit case. For those of you who don't know, Chris Benoit was a WWE wrestler many years ago, and the case is very sad. It is a true crime storytime case. Before I begin, I want to put it out there, for those of you who don't know, I love my wrestling. I grew up watching Chris Benoit on TV, along with the late great Eddie Guerrero, who I think he tragically passed away in a hotel room. There are so many wrestlers that have passed away. I am very much into wrestling. I love my wrestling. I watched WWE growing up in the Chris Benoit period, in the Attitude Era, when it was at its best. And yeah, I'm back into it. I watch AEW now. I love AEW. I was flicking through the TV one day and it came on TV and I thought, oh, wrestling, I'll give this a go. And then Jericho, one of my all-time favourites, walked out and I never looked back. I have stayed watching AEW, the pay-per-views and everything. And then this week, I absolutely lost my mind when Jeff Hardy... I have loved Jeff Hardy since I was a teenager. He's had his demons, he's had his issues, but he is back and he is all elite. I jumped up out of my chair. I was doing anyone who knows Jeff Hardy will know what I'm talking about. I was doing the hip thing, I was doing the arm thing, throughout the whole thing. Yay, very happy that he is all elite. He is fit and healthy and back, and yay, so excited. But I'm just proving I am a true wrestling fan. So you don't have to be a wrestling fan to sit into today's true crime episode. This is very sad. For many years, I believed he didn't do these acts. I thought possibly someone had come into the house. There were so many conspiracy theories, and I was choosing to believe those. And then looking into the case again for my true crime, I watched his friends talking about it, obviously backdated, and I was convinced, watching their reactions, and yeah, it's just tragic, absolutely tragic. Okay, so the case, over a 3-day period from June 22nd to the 24th in 2007, Chris Benoit, a 40-year-old French-Canadian professional wrestler employed by the WWE and living in Georgia. He killed his wife Nancy Benoit and their 7-year-old son Daniel before hanging himself. Autopsy results showed that Nancy was murdered first, and she was bound at the feet and wrists and died of asphyxiation on the night of June 22nd. On June 25th, Nancy was found wrapped in a towel with blood under her head. Although the County District Attorney, Scott, Ballard reported no other signs of a struggle. The couple's son, Daniel Christopher Benoit, also died of asphyxia, was killed as he was laying sedated in his bed on the morning of June 23rd. Then on the evening of June 24th, Chris Benoit killed himself in his weight room when he used his lat pull-down machine to hang himself. He placed Bibles near the bodies of his wife and son. Since Benoit's suicide, numerous explanations for his actions have been proposed, including severe chronic traumatic. I'm going to put the word on screen. There's no way I can say that. It's known as CTE, and it comes from severe concussions, obviously being whacked in the head with chairs, and his profession causes CTE. So that is one explanation as to why this happened. Also steroid and alcohol abuse, leading to a failing marriage and other personal problems, are all reasons as to why this incident happened. The murder led to numerous media accounts and federal investigation into steroid abuse in professional wrestling. Okay, so going back to Friday, June the 22nd in 2007. Chris Benoit killed his wife Nancy in an upstairs bedroom. Her limbs were bound and her body was wrapped in a towel. A copy of the Bible was left by her body. Injuries indicated that Chris had pressed a knee into her back while pulling a cord around her neck, causing strangulation. Officials said there were no signs of an immediate struggle. Toxicologists found alcohol in her body but were unable to determine whether it had been present before death or was a product of decomposition. Decomposition also made it difficult to estimate the pre-death levels of hydrocodone and alprazolam found in therapeutic levels in her body. In any case, her medical examiner saw no evidence that she was sedated, as her son had been when he was killed. Daniel Christopher Benoit was Chris's third child and second son, having older paternal half-siblings named David and Megan via Chris's first wife, Martina. They were all living in Canada at the time that this murder-suicide took place. He was Nancy's only child. Daniel was suffocated and killed in his bedroom, and a copy of the Bible was left by his body. Daniel had internal injuries to the throat area, showing no bruises. Daniel's exact time of death is unknown. The reports determine Daniel was sedated with Xanax and likely unconscious when he was killed. Daniel's body had also just started to show signs of decomposition, but was not as far along as Nancy's. It was later alleged that Daniel had Fragile X syndrome and that this was the cause of the domestic problems in the Benoit family. It was also suggested that needle marks on Daniel's arms were a result of growth hormones given to him because Benoit and his family considered him undersized due to the Fragile X. Benoit's co-worker and best friend wrestler Chris Jericho stated from his own research on the condition that symptoms, quote, fit Daniel to a T all across the board, end quote, concerning those who had publicly stated that they had no knowledge of Daniel having the condition. Jericho said, if Chris had decided that he wanted to keep it to himself, you wouldn't have been able to pry it out of him with anything, end quote. Despite Chris Jericho's initial statements regarding Daniel, he later stated in his 2011 book, it turned out that Daniel didn't have Fragile X, but at the time it made sense because I was grasping at straws, end quote. Now, side note, I have seen the video, everything is available on YouTube, but I have seen the video where Chris said that he showed the symptoms of Fragile X, and then, I don't know if Chris Jericho got backlash for this or not, but he didn't deserve it because he is supporting his friend. So if my best friend has a child with autism, and she said to me, he's been diagnosed with autism, and it made sense because he was very withdrawn. It took him a long time to warm to me. Now I'm his favourite aunt, and he's very open with me. He even hugs me, which is really, and it's nice when it happens because he's not usually affectionate. So my point being that Jericho and Benoit are very, very good friends, and on a personal level, not just a professional level. So when they're both Chris's, okay, when Benoit said to Jericho, I think he might have this, it'd be like, oh, that makes sense. And especially if he's not growing as per everyone else. There's much more allowances for it now. So, yeah, he did later come out and say, okay, so he didn't have it, and, there you go. It's really sad that if he got backlash for that, he didn't deserve it. Okay, moving on. District Attorney Ballard later released a statement saying that a source with access to Daniel's medical files found no mention of any pre-existing mental or physical ailments. Likewise, Daniel Benoit's teachers reported that he was on par with other students and not about to be held back as previously thought. And again, it all ties in, and you're looking for reasons. Side note, my son has ADHD, and I remember I made an appointment with a specialist, and we went, and he was asking me if he has, is he a little bit slower academically? And I said, no, he's on point as far as I'm aware. He shows no signs of a learning disability, because there's a crossover between autism, ADHD and learning disability. There is a category that you can fall into with all three. Like, there's an overlap. So he's determining how far into each bracket he is. If you're being told that your son is going to be held back because they're not on point academically, you look for reasons as to why. And they've obviously researched into this and found this Fragile X that seems to fit. I didn't do that. I fought with the doctor and said I don't really want him diagnosed with that because, but he has it, and I have now embraced it, and I have to make allowances and parent Reese very differently as I did Carl, my oldest. So, yeah. Sorry, side note there. Okay, so they think undersized. They think he's being held back because he's not on par academically. It kind of makes sense for me as a parent. Speaking publicly for the first time in a major public interview on a Talk is Jericho podcast in 2016, Nancy's sister Sandra unequivocally denied any claims that Daniel had ever had Fragile X or any other such condition. She also stated that claims of needle track marks on Daniel's arms were preposterous. At about 3:30 p.m. on Saturday, June 23rd, 2007, fellow wrestler and close friend Chavo Guerrero received a voicemail message from Benoit stating that both Nancy and Daniel had food poisoning and he would be late for that night's house show in Beaumont, Texas. Chavo called Chris Benoit back and found that he sounded tired and groggy as he confirmed everything that he had said in his voice message. Chavo, who was, quote, concerned about Benoit's tone and demeanour, end quote, called him back 12 minutes later. Chris Benoit did not answer the call, and Chavo left a message asking him to call him back. At 3:44 p.m, Chris Benoit called Chavo back, stating he had not answered the call because he was on the phone with Delta Airlines changing his flight. Benoit stated that he had had a stressful day due to Nancy and Daniel, quote, being sick from food poisoning. Guerrero then replied with, quote, all right, man, if you need to talk, I'm here for you, end quote. Benoit ended the conversation by saying, Chavo, I love you. During a 2014 appearance on Chris Jericho's Talk is Jericho podcast, Chavo said Benoit sounded, quote, off when he talked to him, especially when he said, I love you, with emphasis. Another co-worker who often travelled with Benoit called him from outside the Houston airport. Benoit answered and told the co-worker that Nancy was vomiting blood and that Daniel was also vomiting. Benoit failed to show up for the house show in Beaumont and left a voicemail on Chavo's cell phone that he would be on a flight that would arrive at Houston at 8 a.m. the following Sunday morning. During this time, Benoit also called and left a voicemail for an unknown friend. On Sunday, June 24, 2007, 5 text messages were sent to co-workers at around 3:51 a.m. and 3:58 a.m. using both Chris and Nancy's cell phones. 4 of them were the Benoit's address. The 5th said that the family's dogs were enclosed in the pool area and also noted that a garage side door had been left open. Chavo and referee Scott Armstrong were the 2 recipients of these texts. Chavo was woken up by the texts and went back to sleep, telling himself he was picking Benoit up at Houston Airport in a few hours. Benoit failed to show at the Houston Airport and on that flight that arrived at 8 a.m. Late Sunday morning, Benoit called WWE's talent relations office, stating that his son was vomiting and that he and Nancy were at the hospital with him. He also stated that he would be taking a later flight into Houston, where he was scheduled to face CM Punk for the vacant ECW World Championship at Vengeance. Benoit failed to appear for that show. It was a pay-per-view event in Houston on the night of Sunday, June 24th. According to District Attorney Ballard and the city sheriff, Benoit was killed via suicide by hanging. Benoit used a weight machine cord to hang himself by creating a noose from the end of the cord on a pull-down machine from which the bar had been removed. Benoit released the weights, causing strangulation. Ballard said Benoit was found hanging from the pulley cable. On the 2016 Talk is Jericho podcast, Nancy's sister Sandra clarified some details further. She said that over the weekend after the murders, the search history on Benoit's computer showed he had researched, quote, the quickest and easiest way to break a neck, end quote. He had then later used a towel around his neck attached to the handle of the machine, which he pulled down using a very heavy weight and let go, breaking his neck instantly. On Monday, June 25th, 2007, WWE wrestlers and senior officials arrived at Corpus Christi for WWE Raw, which was to take place on that Monday night at the American Bank Center. As the early hours of the afternoon progressed and the show got closer to starting, WWE senior officials were increasingly concerned that they hadn't heard from Chris Benoit in over 24 hours. Chavo Guerrero then showed WWE Vice President of Talent Relations, John Laurinaitis, aka Johnny Ace, the text that he and Scott Armstrong had received from Chris and Nancy's cell phones in the early hours of Sunday. As some more time progressed without any contact from Chris Benoit, WWE called the Georgia police for a welfare check at the Benoit household. After discovering the bodies, the police notified WWE around 4:15 p.m, informing them that they had discovered 3 bodies at the Benoit home and that the house was now ruled as a, quote, major crime scene. A suicide note was not discovered during the initial investigation, but one was later discovered in a Bible that had been among Benoit's possessions that were sent to his first wife, Martina Benoit, and their 2 children in Canada. Benoit's father, Michael, stated that his son Chris had left, quote, a handwritten notation in there saying, I'm preparing to leave this earth, end quote. A memorial for Nancy and Daniel took place in Daytona Beach, Florida on July the 14th, 2007. Both were cremated and their ashes placed in a starfish-shaped urns for Nancy's family. Chris was also cremated following a private memorial service in Alberta on August the 6th, 2007, but the fate of his ashes has not been publicly revealed. Don't blame them for that. WWE attorney Jerry McDevitt appeared on Live with Dan Abrams on July the 17th, 2007, and said that Benoit was prescribed testosterone as part of a treatment for replacement therapy, which the attorney, Jerry, said was a common medical practice for people who had used steroids in the past and had suffered damage downstairs as a result. Former wrestler Christopher Nowinski stated that Benoit may have been suffering from repeated, untreated concussions throughout his wrestling career, ultimately leading to an unstable mental state. Nowinski was quoted as saying that Benoit, quote, was one of the only guys who would take a chair shot to the back of the head, which is stupid, end quote. Tests conducted on Benoit's brain by Julian Bales, the head of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, showed, quote, Benoit's brain was so severely damaged it resembled the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient, end quote. Other tests conducted on Benoit's brain tissue revealed the CTE that I said earlier, and damage to all 4 lobes of the brain and brain stem. The examiner and his colleagues concluded that repeated concussions can lead to dementia, which can contribute to severe behavioural problems. Chris Benoit's father, Michael, said that brain damage may have been the leading cause in the double murder-suicide. A statement released by WWE dismissed this idea as speculative. I'm going to talk about WWE after this, okay? Because I have very strong opinions on WWE, but that annoys and upsets me. Okay. Nancy Benoit had filed for divorce in May 2003, allegedly after domestic abuse from her husband Chris, but had withdrawn it in August 2003. In February 2008, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that Nancy may have suspected her husband of having an affair with a female WWE wrestler, and that they may have also argued over a life insurance policy. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution claimed the source was a recently released report from the county sheriff's office. Speaking on the matter in his autobiography, The Hardcore Truth, Hardcore Holly speculates the main influence in Chris Benoit's actions was alcohol abuse rather than steroids. Holly and Benoit travelled together on the road during their time together in WWE, and Holly did not believe steroids played a factor and that Benoit had tended to drink more than he normally would when issues with Nancy arose. I mean, that's standard. You're upset, you're annoyed, you drink more. Several conspiracy theories had also claimed that the incident was not a murder-suicide, and rather Benoit was murdered alongside his family in their home, which is what I believed for many years. There were suggestions that Kevin Sullivan, Nancy's ex-husband, had broken into their home and murdered them. However, the police cleared him. Now, just for clarification, and as a fan of wrestling, Nancy was Kevin Sullivan's manager and wife in real life, in WWE, and I don't know if she broke up with him, then went with Chris, but there was like a lot of, were they having an affair first? But as far as I'm aware, and looking into this case, whether Nancy had an affair first and then left her husband, I don't know. But what I do know is that she was married to Kevin Sullivan, left him, and then was with Chris. And there was a little bit of animosity, obviously, but nothing major. Just from my take on that. Okay, so now going into the responses to this tragic case. The deaths were first reported to fans of WWE on their mobile alert service and posted to its official website soon after. On its website, the company released the following statement. Quote, World Wrestling Entertainment was informed today by authorities in Georgia that WWE superstar Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and his son were found dead in their home. Authorities are investigating, but no other details are available at this time. Instead of its announced programming for tonight on USA Network, WWE will air a 3-hour tribute to Chris Benoit. Chris was beloved among his fellow superstars and was a favourite among WWE fans for his unbelievable athleticism and wrestling ability. He always took great pride in his performance and always showed respect for the business he loved, for his peers and towards his fans. This is a terrible tragedy and an unbearable loss. WWE extends its sincere condolences and prayers to the surviving members of the Benoit family and their loved ones in this time of tragedy. End quote. After, Vince McMahon had gathered the wrestlers together to tell them that Chris, Nancy and Daniel had all died. WWE cancelled the scheduled 3-hour-long live Raw show that had been scheduled for a few hours later on the night of June 25th, which coincidentally was supposed to be a memorial for the Mr. McMahon character, who on the June 11th episode of Raw died in a limo explosion that was scheduled to take place at the American Bank Center in Corpus Christi, Texas, and replaced the broadcast with a version of a tribute to Chris Benoit's life and career, featuring past matches, segments from the Hard Knocks, the Chris Benoit Story DVD, and comments from wrestlers and announcers from the Raw, SmackDown and ECW brands. Shortly after the program aired, many of the aired comments were posted on WWE.com. It was not until the last hour of the tribute program that reports surfaced that one after the other that Chris, Nancy and Daniel had all died on different days over the weekend, and that the police were not looking for any other suspects, working under the belief that Chris Benoit murdered his wife and son before killing himself. The next night, Tuesday, June 26, 2007, after details of the murder-suicide became available, the company aired a recorded statement by Vince McMahon before its ECW broadcast. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show recognising the career of Chris Benoit. However, now, some 26 hours later, the facts of this horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name tonight. On the contrary, tonight's show will be dedicated to everyone who has been affected by this terrible incident. This evening marks the first step of the healing process. Tonight, WWE performers will do what they do better than anyone else in the world: entertain you. On Friday, June 29, 2007, before SmackDown edition of that week, Vince McMahon released another statement indicating that the related events of the tragedy were not known at that time. The rest of the statement remained the same as the first one. On a recent edition of Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show recognising the career of Chris Benoit. However, the facts of this horrific tragedy involving Chris Benoit were not known at the time. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name in this programme. On the contrary, this show is dedicated to everyone who had been affected by this terrible incident. This marks the first step of the healing process, whereby WWE performers will now do what they do better than anyone else in the world: entertain you. After learning the full details of his and his family's deaths, WWE quickly distanced itself from Chris Benoit. Except for his results and listings in WWE's title history of his title reigns have been removed, and select press releases from WWE's corporate subsite. The WWE website removed all past mentions of Chris Benoit, including all news articles relating to specific details of the incident, and as well as his biography and the video tribute comments from Benoit's peers. WWE pulled the tribute episode from international markets, which aired Raw on a tape delay basis. Several channels announced the episode was being withheld for legal reasons. A substitute Raw, hosted by Todd Grissom from WWE Studios, was created, featuring recaps of WWE Championship and the World Heavyweight Championship matches which had occurred over the past year. Benoit's name was removed from his previous theme song, Rabid, on the MP3 release of WWE's Anthropology. Benoit, along with his crippler crossface, that was his signature move, and other signature moves, were removed from the WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 video game, after Benoit was originally included in the game as a playable character. Starting with WWE and SmackDown vs. Raw 2010, the move was reinstated as crossface. WWE Classics On Demand, WWE's subscription video on demand service, began removing the likeness and mentions of both Chris and Nancy Benoit from archived footage. Matches and other footage involving Benoit appeared very sparingly on any WWE DVD release following his death, with all of them being footage involving multiple wrestlers, such as a battle royal or a multiple person tag team match. The WCW War Games DVD by WWE, which featured all of the War Games matches, does include the 1997 WCW Full Brawl War Games match between the NWO and the Four Horsemen, featuring Benoit, who was not involved in the finish of the match, but commentary about Benoit has been edited out. Although Benoit is referred to as a mystery partner. On the WWE Network, a parental advisory warning is shown before a program that features Benoit. The WWE Network shows the June 25th, 2007 internationally aired episode of Raw featuring several world title matches instead of the original Benoit tribute show. The opening promo for the June 26, 2007 ECW show with Vince McMahon mentioning Benoit has also been omitted from the broadcast. I think you get my point. They are erasing any trace of Benoit, any mention of Benoit, and kind of over-editing it. It does go on and on. Hulk Hogan commented on Benoit's personality and his thoughts on the crime, saying, quote, "He was peaceful and kept to himself. I think it had to be something personal, a domestic problem between him and his wife," end quote. Kurt Angle chose to comment more on the frenzy created by the crime, stating, quote, "This is not WWE's fault, and this is not Vince McMahon's fault. Chris Benoit was responsible for his own actions," end quote. Eric Bischoff discussed the media frenzy, saying, quote, "It's clear that the media wants to blame steroids, professional wrestling, Vince McMahon, or anyone or anything else that further sensationalizes this family tragedy. I refuse to join in the choir. I don't have enough information. I wasn't there. I am not a psychiatrist. I just can't imagine how or why this could have happened," end quote. Other wrestlers commented, including Lex Luger, Mark Miro, Ted DiBiase, Senior Bret Hart, Kevin Nash, Lance Storm, Chyna, Steve Blackman, Rob Van Dam. I even did the RVD in, Ultimate Warrior, Chris Jericho, and William Regal. Vince McMahon and his wife Linda were interviewed separate and jointly by various news outlets. CM Punk, who was scheduled to face Benoit that night at the pay-per-view, the night he died, was among the many WWE personnel that commented on Benoit during the 3-hour tribute show on Raw. He also briefly touched on the subject of the Benoit murder-suicide in 2011 interview with GQ. He described it as, quote, "a pretty low point in everyone's life. A lot of people don't like to talk about it. It still blows my mind," end quote. At the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con International, during an interview session with wrestlers including CM Punk, he was asked if WWE was trying to erase Benoit from history. Punk responded that while Benoit is in the history books and that cannot be changed, it does not make any sense for WWE to promote him due to, quote, "the horrific nature of what he did." Sean Waltman, who is X-Pac, for those of you who don't know, in 2014 interview said, "He was a pleasant guy, but always had a darkness about him, a sadness or something," end quote. Paul Heyman, in a 2019 interview with Inside the Ropes, briefly mentioned Benoit during an interview focused on Brock Lesnar after a fan kept interrupting whenever Heyman mentioned Chris Benoit's name, and said 3 people died in that house that night and only one person, Benoit, had the choice behind it, as the other 2, Nancy and Daniel, didn't have a choice to die. Heyman also stated that he doesn't care about CTE being the motive behind Benoit's actions, and while forever respecting Benoit as a performer, lost any and all respect and compassion for him personally following the incident. I'm adding those in for the wrestling fans. In the media now, when news was released about Chris Benoit's death, the most mainstream news outlets covered the story, including MSNBC and Fox News Central. Benoit made the cover of People's Magazine, and of course people started writing books about this. With Benoit and his death allegedly linked to steroid abuse, WWE underwent investigation by the United States House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform regarding their talent wellness policy. Congress did not take action against either the WWE or any other professional wrestling company in the wake of the event. Now, side note, this later came out. Vince, being a well-to-do millionaire, mixes with well-to-do millionaires, and he became buddies with Donald Trump, who even showed up in WWE. I remember that, before he was president. And yeah, so when he did become president, why would he look into it, you know? So again, it's who you know. Okay, in January 2009, Henry Waxman, outgoing chairman for the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, requested that the Office of National Drug Control Policy Chief John Walters, quote, examine steroid use in professional wrestling and take appropriate steps to address the problem, end quote. In the letter, Waxman stated, quote, in the first year of WWE's testing program, which began in March 2006, 40% of wrestlers tested positive for steroids and other drugs, even after being warned in advance that they were going to be tested, end quote. He also wrote about how wrestlers who test positive for performance enhancers receive light punishment and afterwards can often participate in wrestling events. The committee investigation also uncovered how easily wrestlers can secure, quote, therapeutic use exemptions, end quote. They're known as TUEs. They are permission to take banned substances for medical reasons, so they can continue performing while using steroids. When Waxman's staff interviewed Dr. Tracy Ray, a doctor contracted by WWE, Ray claimed there was, quote, shadiness in almost every TUE case that I have reviewed, end quote. At the time of the incident, research into CTE, led by forensic neuropathologist, I'm just going to call him Bennett. His name is Bennett Omalu. In former players of football, there was a fast-growing issue in the sport that had been the forefront, following Dr. Bennett's 2002 report on Pro Football Hall of Fame member Mike Webster, done after his death. Subsequent post-mortem analysis of the brains of recently deceased NFL players agreed with the report on Webster's death, as each player showed the kind of brain damage previously seen in people with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, as well as some retired boxers. Michael Benoit, Chris's dad, agreed to have his son's brain analysed by the same neurosurgeons. On September the 5th, 2007, Julian Bales, the chief of neurosurgery at West Virginia University, conducted a news conference in New York City to announce the results of Benoit's post-mortem brain examination. Quote, "When the Sports Legacy Institute approached Michael Benoit about testing Chris's brain as part of the Sports Legacy project, our goal was to determine if there was evidence of CTE caused by repeated trauma to the head sustained during Chris Benoit's career. We have now confirmed multiple concussions were part of his medical history, along with clinical symptoms associated with CTE. Because my colleagues and I have found evidence of CTE in the brains of 4 former professional football players, we felt an examination of Chris Benoit's brain may bring awareness to CTE's existence outside of boxers and football players. The findings of CTE in Chris Benoit suggest that there may be a common syndrome among athletes who suffer multiple head injuries in contact sports." End quote. In December 2009, nearly 30 months after Benoit's death, Dr. Bennett confirmed to ESPN's Outside the Lines that the death of a second WWE wrestler, Andrew Martin, known in WWE as Test, big fan here, was attributed to CTE. Bales told ESPN, quote, "When we announced our findings about Chris, some in the media said it was steroid rage. We said at the time the real finding was that repeated head trauma was the cause, with Andrew Martin Test as the second case. The WWE and the sport in general have to ask themselves, is this a trend? The science tells us that jumping off 10-foot ladders and slamming people with tables and chairs is simply bad for the brain." End quote. And again, I look at Matt and Jeff Hardy and Edge and Christian and the Dudley Boys, all still living. You have to question this. You know, they really put their bodies on the line for the sport that they love. And it's a case of WWE owning up to it and looking after their wrestlers. The wrestlers earn a wage, a very nice wage from what I understand, but WWE make a whole lot more. I'm sorry, someone is now doing garden work when I'm trying to record this, so if you can hear something in the background, I apologise. Okay, moving on. WWE noted the research was new at the time, but released the following statement to ESPN for Outside the Lines. Quote, "While this is a new emerging science, the WWE is unaware of the veracity of any of these tests, be it for Chris Benoit or Andrew Martin. Dr. Bennett claims that Mr. Benoit had a brain that resembled an 85-year-old with Alzheimer's, which would lead one to ponder how Mr. Benoit would have found his way to an airport, let alone be able to remember all the moves and information that is required to perform in the ring, end quote. In the decade that followed after the broadcast, post-mortem brain research on numerous deceased wrestlers diagnosed findings consistent with CTE. Wrestlers diagnosed with CTE in post-mortem research include Axel Rotten, Balls Mahoney, Jimmy Snuka, Mr. Fuji, and Ron Bass. Over 60 professional wrestlers and representatives of deceased wrestlers filed lawsuits against WWE, with the attorney Konstantin Kairos representing them. The litigation claims WWE concealed the risks of injury, specifically CTE. United States District Judge Vanessa Lynn Bryant dismissed the lawsuits in September 2018. Bryant said that the Benoit tragedy did not cause WWE to recognise a link between CTE and professional wrestling, but stated, quote, "The circumstances surrounding Mr. Benoit's death was so tragic and so horrifying that it would have been reasonable for his fellow wrestlers to follow news developments about him and about CTE through which they could have deduced that they were at risk of developing CTE and sought medical opinions about risks to their own health," end quote. So basically, they would have been aware of all this news media, even though they work very hectic schedules, do a lot of recordings and matches and stuff. They would have found the time to go, oh, okay, so Chris may have had CTE, which means he had the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient instead of a healthy 40-year-old brain, because he was 40. So I should go and have a look, book into a doctor's, get my own opinion. Where are the staff and what are the staff doing with WWE? I will talk about that later. I keep getting sidetracked with this. I get annoyed at WWE, like big time. The United States Courts of Appeals for the Second Circuit rejected an appeal in September 2020. This is still going on. And the Supreme Court of the United States declined to hear the case in April 2021. Now we're going to talk about the steroids debate. Steroids were found in the home, leading some media organisations to hypothesize that a steroid-induced rage may be the cause of Benoit's actions, as some doctors have linked steroid use to uncontrollable anger, among other psychological issues, which include paranoia. WWE released a press statement challenging the roid rage, as it's claimed. One part of the statement reads, quote, "The physical findings announced by authorities indicate deliberation, not rage. The wife's feet and hands were bound and she was asphyxiated, not beaten to death. By the account of the authorities, there were substantial periods of time between the death of the wife and the death of the son, again suggesting deliberate thought, not rage. The presence of a Bible by each is also not an act of rage," end quote. Prosecutors in New York investigated the deliveries Benoit received from Signature Pharmacy and MedXLife.com, which sold steroids and human growth hormones, HGH, over the internet. The lawyer for MedX Life, co-owner Gary Brandwein, denied allegations that his client's company sold steroids to Benoit. Brandwein pleaded not guilty to 6 counts in New York State court related to the criminal sale of controlled substance. According to a report from Sports Illustrated, 3 packages were sent to Benoit were from Signature Pharmacy, with the first one sent in December 2005 to San Antonio, Texas. The second package was sent on February the 13th, 2006 to an address in Peachtree City, Georgia, and the third package was sent in July 2006 to Fort Walton Beach, Florida. This followed 11 wrestlers that were announced in a Sports Illustrated steroids investigation that began in March 2007, which included Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr., Edge, Adam Copeland, and Gregory Helms, which I think Gregory Helms is Hurricane Helms, I think, with Edge receiving high amount of steroids. I'm sorry, Edge. I like Edge. Even today, I still like Edge. WWE attorney Jerry McDevitt stated that, quote, they believe the facts of this crime do not support the hypothesis that roid rage played a role in the murders, end quote. They cite evidence of premeditation, in addition to the lack of a toxicology report and the fact that the steroids found within Benoit's home were legally prescribed. Investigators seized both Chris and Nancy's medical records. They also have medical records of Mark Jindrak, Hardcore Holly, Lex Luger, Rey Mysterio Jr., Buff Bagwell, and Johnny Grunge, all of whom were patients of Phil Astin. At the press conference held by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation on the 17th of July 2007, it was announced that 3 different drugs were found in Nancy Benoit's system. Hydrocodone, hydromorphone, I can't pronounce these, and Xanax. All 3 drugs were found to be at levels investigators considered normal for therapeutic treatment, as opposed to recreation use or abuse. A blood alcohol level was found to be 0.184. Chris Sperry, the medical examiner, added it was impossible to say whether any of the blood findings were due to ingestion of alcohol or the post-mortem process. It was also ruled out that Nancy was sedated by Chris before she was murdered. Xanax was found in Daniel Benoit's system. District Attorney Scott Ballard noted that this was not a drug that would be given to a child under normal circumstances. It was believed that Daniel was sedated before being murdered, with Sperry ruling out that Daniel died of a drug overdose. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, however, said in the press conference that it could not perform tests for steroids or human growth hormones on Daniel because of the lack of urine. Xanax and hydrocodone were also found in Chris Benoit's system at levels investigators called consistent with therapeutic use. Elevated levels of the synthetic anabolic steroid testosterone were found in his urine. Investigators believed that the level found suggested that it had been taken recently. While the synthetic anabolic steroid testosterone was found in his urine, there was no evidence of GBH, contrary to speculation. Benoit also tested negative for blood alcohol. Phil Astin III was the personal doctor for Chris Benoit. His attorney, Manny Aurora, asked a judge to throw out evidence seized during a raid on Astin's office after Benoit and his family died. He claimed the search exceeded the authority granted in a search warrant, and the police seized other patients' records and 3 years of bank records and computers. According to the Associated Press, in February 2008, Astin was charged with overprescribing medication in a case not connected to Benoit. On January 29, 2009, he admitted he illegally prescribed drugs, sometimes without examining the patients first, and pleaded guilty to all 175 counts against him. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Okay, to summarise this part of it, news leaked out onto, I believe it was Wikipedia, that something was happening at the Benoit household and that there were bodies. I don't quite know what the rumour was, but police detectives seized the computer equipment from the man held responsible for the postings and called the posting an unbelievable, quote, hindrance to their investigation, but believed he was otherwise uninvolved, declining to press charges. The man had found several rumours online which supported his theory about the Benoit, quote, family emergency, as reported in the wrestling news. So people are speculating because he didn't turn up to his title match at Vengeance, and I think Johnny Nitro stepped in to face CM Punk. So people are like, well, hang on, you've been promoting Benoit, where's Benoit? So rumours and fans began to speculate what had been happening. So, yeah, I mean, that happens an awful lot, especially, AEW are very good at keeping their secrets. They are extremely very good at it. When CM Punk was coming back after 7 years in retirement, very few people knew about it. We heard rumblings and we didn't know if he was coming, but AEW are very good at keeping their secrets, and no one saw. We all hoped Jeff Hardy would come, and he has, but we didn't know for sure. Okay, so aftermath and legacy. In the years following the double murder and suicide, it continued to be referred to in the media, and I'm here in 2022 talking about this. The Great American Bash pay-per-view on July 20, 2008 was the last WWE pay-per-view with a TV 14 rating. WWE immediately thereafter adopted their current TV PG, which resulted in a noticeable toning down of edgy content in shows. Within a few months, blood was severely toned down, and which returned WWE's product to its pre-1997 rule on prohibiting deliberate blading in matches. There have been discussions about whether or not Benoit would ever be induced into the WWE Hall of Fame. Steve Austin, another legend in the wrestling world, he is my mum's favourite wrestler. She doesn't watch it anymore, but Steve Austin predicted that Benoit, although important to the business, would never be inducted into the Hall of Fame due to his actions. Chris Jericho also stated that Benoit should never be in the Hall of Fame. The incident was cited by the Shield writer Sean Ryan as inspiration for his main character Shane Vendrell's murder-suicide in the series finale episode of Family Meeting, aired on November 25th, 2008. The rap group Insane Clown Posse released a music video for the song Chris Benoit. The song and video, however, are not about Benoit himself, but a man's breakdown that is similar to Benoit's. The song and music video do include stock footage and a recording of Chris Benoit before his death. A remix with rappers Ice Cube and Scarface was later released, with Ice Cube's verse being entirely about Benoit. In a July 2013 interview, Nancy Benoit's sister Sandra said she believes a blackout caused him to murder her sister. She stated that the medical examiner who examined Benoit's body stated that he had only 10 more months to live due to an enlarged heart. Sandra also stated that Benoit was contemplating retiring and opening a wrestling school, but decided to continue wrestling due to being in one of the main events at Vengeance for the ECW World Championship. A biopic entitled Crossface was announced in 2011, which would have been based on the book Ring of Hell, the story of Chris Benoit and the fall of the pro wrestling industry. The film would have shown Benoit from his early days being trained by the Hart family to his rise with ECW, WCW and WWE, to the deaths of his wife and son, and his suicide. Now, I can't say his name, but do you know Ray Donovan, the actor who plays Ray Donovan? He was set to portray Benoit in that. Filming was set to begin in 2012. However, according to Chris's oldest son, David, the film was cancelled following a legal dispute with the Benoit family. In March 2020, Vice's Dark Side of the Ring released a 2-hour documentary episode featuring his son David and Nancy's sister Sandra and wrestling legends Chavo Guerrero, Vicky Guerrero, who is the wife of the late great Eddie Guerrero, JR, Jim Ross, we love Jim Ross, Dean Malenko, and Chris Jericho. And there you go. It is a lot to get your head around. Now for my opinions. I'm going to keep it short, to the point, so you can get on with your day. Firstly, as you can tell, I am a bit passionate about wrestling. It has extended to my kids. They love AEW and they have their favourites. And I sat and watched the wrestling with Carl and Reese tonight, and he was absolutely shocked that Chris Jericho turned heel. He turned on the Inner Circle. His mouth hit the floor. It was fun to see. I already watched it, so I knew it was coming. But keeping it to the Chris Benoit case. I don't know where I stand. When I edited the first part of the case, the story, I was convinced that CTE was to blame for the behaviour changes. And it's true, CTE does cause behavioural changes. a long time ago, I came across a video, and there's plenty of them out there. There's so many wrestling videos out there on YouTube. And I think it was like 10 wrestlers that had died or something like that. And Test was one of them. And then I found a video of, I think it was Andrew's, let's use his real name, Andrew Martin's parents. And they were talking about how when he was young, he was obsessed with wrestling, and then he grew up and he lived and breathed wrestling, and then he got into WWE and he was living his dream. He was happy, he was chilled out, taking his career seriously and embracing his life, that he ended up making it into the WWE and things like that. And then over time, towards the end of his life, he became depressed, and he became like not aggressive, but like snappy, and completely out of character, and pretty much the opposite of what they had known Andrew to be his whole life. And that is a symptom of CTE, which when he passed away, he proved to have. I listed Jimmy Snuka, Balls Mahoney, and a couple of others. I can't say I know those names very well, but I do know the name Jimmy Snuka and believe he's one of the OGs of wrestling. They also had CTE. And again, their families may have noticed sort of changes in their behaviour. Not one other wrestler that I am aware of with CTE committed murder-suicide. So now I'm stumped. Was this... I don't know if perhaps Chris Benoit had CTE more severe than other people. I don't know. I don't know the ins and outs. I am just purely putting my opinions out there. But he is the only murder-suicide CTE person out there. So that begs the question, was it CTE that contributed to it? Also, on the Friday he killed Nancy, we suspect. On the Saturday he killed Daniel. On the Sunday he was still saying to work colleagues, I'm getting the next plane out to come to the pay-per-view. He had no intention of, I don't think, but he was still telling them this. Chavo phoned him several times, concerned about the way he was talking, about the way he was sounding, and he was just like, look mate, I'm here if you need me. Not once did he say, look, I'm having these really dark thoughts and I really want to harm my family and possibly myself. He never once spoke out. And I get that he was a private person. It's always been said that he was a private person. But I find that odd. When I am going through I call them low moods, and my mum's kind of cottoned on, it's depression. I can own it, but I call them low moods. And I hadn't seen my mum for a couple of weeks. I hadn't spoke to her on the phone, and normally we're really close. So I went over at the weekend, and she said, are you all right? And I went, yeah, no, I'm fine. I said, you know what I'm like, I just hibernate and I get in a low mood. And she said, you only have to pick up the phone. And I'm like, I know, but I don't want to. I just don't want to. I don't want to hear it. I know what the problem is. I just can't be bothered to deal with it. And that's what depression is. And I said to her, for the last couple of weekends, I've said to myself, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to go and see my mum. And then Saturday rolls around and I think, I'll go tomorrow. And then I just don't. And she said, well, just message me and let me know that you're okay. Because it's been ages. And I'm like, I know. And I'm glad I'm here. It made a lot of difference sitting and talking to her. And if only Benoit had reached out to one of his friends and said, look, I'm struggling, or something, just said something, who knows where we'd be today. I wouldn't be here spending an hour and a half with you guys, that's for sure. Thank you so much for listening to my true crime story time on the Chris Benoit case. I have waffled on long enough. There's a lot to digest, but I want you to leave your thoughts and your comments down below. And I was really, really sad to learn yesterday, as I'm doing this episode, I started yesterday and then, it's taken me a while to get this done. But yesterday I found out or read or saw on Instagram that Razor Ramon has passed away. I don't believe, I think he retired and went about his life and has passed away. I don't think anything happened as such. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, it's just sad. So rest in peace, Razor Ramon, as well. Bless. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, guys. I need to get this uploaded for you because you'll be all sitting there wondering where I am on Thursday. But I'll be there. I will have uploaded this for you for Thursday, I promise. Thank you so much for keeping me company. Please do have a chat with me in the comments. What do you think to this case? Let me know. And as always, stay safe out there. Bye!